The screen is black. The only sound is the gentle, rhythmic hum of a city at night, a distant siren, the whisper of tires on wet pavement. Then, a soft light bleeds into the frame. We are in a sparsely furnished living room in Portland, Oregon. Moonlight filters through a large window, casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. Cardboard boxes are stacked against one wall, a silent testament to a life being dismantled. I'm on my knees, my silhouette framed by the window. The air is thick with the smell of dust and old paper. In front of me is a medium-sized box, the flaps open like a wound. I pick up a thick, worn textbook from the floor. The title on the spine reads, Introduction to Chemistry. My fingers trace the letters, a feather-light touch, as if the book itself might shatter. I open it to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. A single passage is highlighted in bright, aggressive pink. Covalent bond, a chemical bond that involves the sharing of electron pairs between atoms. Sharing. The word hangs in the air, heavy and ironic. I close the book gently, the soft thud echoing in the silence. I place it inside the box, on top of a messy pile of notebooks and loose papers. Then, I grab a roll of packing tape. The sound it makes as I pull a strip free is violent, a screech that rips through the quiet sorrow of the room. I press the tape firmly over the box's seam, sealing it shut. Once. Twice. I take a black marker and, in neat, block letters, I write a name on the side of the box, Leo. My face is a mask. No tears. No anger. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. The camera pushes in on my face as I stare at the box, at his name. The story isn't in what's happening now. It's in everything that led to this moment. The screen fades to black. Fade in. 1 year earlier. The Portland sun, a rare and cherished thing in early spring, streamed into the very same living room. But back then, it wasn't a tomb of memories, it was a home. It was filled with mismatched furniture we'd found at thrift stores, thriving houseplants I meticulously cared for, and the comfortable, lived-in chaos of two people building a life together. My name is Clara. I'm 31, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been a checklist. Firstborn daughter of Vietnamese immigrants. Check. Straight A's. Check. Undergrad degree, then a master's in library and information science. Check, check. I never felt a burning passion for it, not really. It was more like fulfilling a contract, a duty to my family who sacrificed everything so I could have a stable career. And I did. I was an archivist at a major tech company, a job I genuinely liked, a job that was predictable and safe. My life was a carefully constructed narrative, each chapter following logically from the last. And then there was Leo. Leo was the unwritten chapter, the plot twist I never saw coming. At 33, he was my opposite in almost every way. He'd never graduated high school. The structured world of academics was like a foreign country to him, one he had no desire to visit. But to say he wasn't smart would be the biggest misjudgment you could make. His intelligence wasn't found in textbooks, it was in his hands, in his intuition. I remember the day my brand new dishwasher gave up the ghost. I'd spent an hour on the phone with customer service, getting transferred from one department to another, only to be told they'd have to send a technician out in 3 to 5 business days. I was fuming. Leo came home, saw the frustrated look on my face, and simply said, "Let me take a look." He didn't have a manual. He just had a screwdriver and a quiet confidence that was both baffling and incredibly attractive. He lay on the kitchen floor, humming to himself, and within 20 minutes, the dishwasher was purring like a kitten. "How did you do that?" I'd asked, completely in awe. He slid out from under the counter, wiping a smudge of grease from his cheek. The drain pump was clogged with a piece of a plastic lid. Simple. It wasn't simple to me. Nothing he did was simple to me. He could fix a running toilet, mount a 60-inch TV perfectly level on the first try, and diagnose a strange noise in my car's engine just by listening to it for a few seconds. I considered this a form of genius, a practical wisdom that my master's degree couldn't teach me. And his mind was a sponge for the world. He was an avid watcher of documentaries, a voracious reader of historical non-fiction. He could hold a conversation on anything from the fall of the Roman Empire to the intricacies of deep-sea ecosystems. He didn't just know facts, he understood narratives, the great, sweeping stories of humanity. We'd been friends for a long time before we started dating, and that foundation was built on endless conversations that stretched late into the night. I thought our differences were our greatest strength. I brought structure, he brought spontaneity. I had book smarts, he had life smarts. We fit. But there was a flip side to Leo's brilliant, untamed mind. He had severe, unmedicated ADHD. It manifested as a kind of time blindness. 5 minutes and 50 minutes felt the same to him. This, combined with his supernatural ability to sleep through any alarm clock known to man, meant he'd never been able to hold a job. He was a trail of lost positions, fired for being late, for forgetting a shift, for simply losing focus. He was supported financially by his family, a wealthy, unconditionally loving clan who saw his eccentricities not as flaws, but as part of his charm. They enabled his freedom, and while I was grateful for their support, a small, practical part of me worried. His life was a series of grand, unfinished ideas. One week, he was going to be a famous actor. He bought headshots and took an improv class. The next, he was going to be a professional game streamer. Our apartment was suddenly filled with microphones and green screens. Then, he decided he was destined to be a horror novelist, inspired by Stephen King. He'd stay up all night, fueled by coffee, writing furiously, only to abandon the manuscript a week later. I was his patient, supportive audience through it all. I believed in his potential, in the bright spark I saw in him. I just wished it would land on something, anything, and stick. Then one day, earlier that year, it seemed like it finally had. We were eating dinner on our small balcony, overlooking the quiet, tree-lined street. The air was crisp with the promise of summer. Leo had been unusually quiet, pushing his food around his plate. "What's on your mind?" I asked, sipping my wine. He looked up at me, and for the first time, the usual flighty energy in his eyes was replaced by a solid, focused intensity. "I'm done messing around, Clara," he said. His voice was firm. "I know what I want to do." I braced myself for another grand pronouncement. "A rock star? An artisanal cheesemaker? I'm going to be a mechanical engineer." I blinked, surprised. Of all the things he'd ever said, this was the most concrete. The most challenging. "Wow, Leo. That's a big goal." "I know," he said, a confident smile spreading across his face. "But I can do it. Think about it. It's everything I'm good at. Fixing things, understanding how they work, building stuff. It's a real job. A career." He was right. It did make a strange kind of sense. It was a way to channel his unique intelligence into something tangible, something respected. "I'm serious this time," he continued, his voice electric with newfound purpose. "I'm enrolling in online classes tomorrow to get my GED. I'll finish high school, and then I'm going to apply to Portland State." A wave of pride and hope washed over me. This was it. This was different. He wasn't just talking, he had a plan. He had steps. I reached across the table and took his hand. "I think that's an amazing idea," I said, my voice full of genuine support. "I'm so proud of you. And I'll help you in any way I can." He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining. "I know you will. We're a team, right?" "Always," I said. That night, I fell asleep feeling more optimistic about our future than I ever had before. I imagined him graduating, wearing a cap and gown, finding a job he loved, a job he could keep. I imagined us building a real, stable life together. The checklist in my head was finally aligning with the beautiful, chaotic man I loved. I had no idea that in supporting his dream, I was handing him the very tools he would later use to dismantle us. The first step on his new path was also the first step toward our end. The foundation of our relationship, which I thought was built on rock, was about to be tested. And we were about to discover it was made of nothing more than sand. True to his word, Leo enrolled the very next day. Our apartment, once a sanctuary of creative chaos, transformed into a makeshift study hall. He chose the subjects he needed to pass the GED exam, math and chemistry. He set up a small desk in the corner of the living room, meticulously arranging his new textbooks, notebooks, and a set of brightly colored pens. There was a seriousness to his efforts that I'd never seen before. The gaming console gathered dust. The half-finished horror novel was filed away. His focus was absolute. For the first few weeks, it was wonderful. An air of shared purpose filled our home. I'd come home from work to find him hunched over his laptop, headphones on, deep in a lecture about algebraic equations. I would make us dinner, and we'd eat while he excitedly explained the concepts he was learning. He was rediscovering a part of his brain that had laid dormant for years, and it was exhilarating to watch. "I can't believe I ever thought this stuff was hard," he'd say, laughing. "It's just like fixing an engine. You just have to know where all the parts go." I was his biggest cheerleader. I helped him create study schedules, quizzed him with flashcards, and proofread his essays. I felt like a true partner, contributing to his success in a meaningful way. The nagging worry I'd always had about his future began to recede. We were a team, just like he'd said. We were building something solid. The first cracks began to show subtly. They were so small at first, I barely noticed them. It started with chemistry. Math, to my surprise, came easily to him. He had a natural, intuitive grasp of logic and systems, which made algebra feel like a puzzle he was born to solve. But chemistry was different. It was abstract. It required memorization, a skill his ADHD-riddled mind actively rebelled against. I'd see the frustration building. He'd read the same paragraph over and over, his leg bouncing restlessly under the desk. He'd let out a heavy sigh, running his hands through his hair. He, a man who could take apart a transmission and put it back together blindfolded, was being defeated by the concept of electron shells. He wasn't used to feeling like he wasn't the smartest person in the room even when the room was empty except for him and a pre-recorded lecture. In his friend group, with Rick and the others, Leo was the undisputed genius. He was the one who explained complex political situations, the one who always won at Trivial Pursuit, the one who could speak with authority on any topic. He talked over everyone else, not out of malice, but because he was so used to being the one with the answers. This new struggle, this new feeling of being dumb, was a foreign and unwelcome sensation. It was a direct blow to his ego. And without realizing it, he began looking for a way to patch the hole, to regain his sense of intellectual superiority. Unfortunately, I was the closest and easiest target. The first time it happened, it felt like a paper cut. Sharp, surprising, but easy to dismiss. It was a Friday night. We had planned to watch a movie, a new thriller I had been excited to see all week. I had a bowl of popcorn ready, the lights were dimmed. But as I was about to press play, Leo looked up from his desk. "Hey, do you mind if we skip the movie tonight?" he asked, chewing on the end of his pen. "I really need to cram for this chemistry quiz." I felt a small pang of disappointment, but I pushed it down. "Oh. Of course, no problem," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Your studies are more important." "Thanks, you're the best," he said, already turning back to his screen. I didn't want to just sit on the couch and watch him study, so I grabbed a book and sat in the armchair next to his desk. I wanted to be near him, to offer quiet support. The room was silent except for the soft clicking of his keyboard and the rustle of my pages. After a while, my curiosity got the better of me. "What are you working on?" I whispered, not wanting to break his concentration. He pointed to his screen. "The basics. Definitions of covalent bonds, ionic bonds, that kind of stuff." I leaned over to look. The diagrams of shared electrons and atomic nuclei were vaguely familiar, ghosts from a high school class I'd taken over a decade ago. I smiled. "Oh, cool," I said casually. "I get to learn this stuff all over again, too." It was an innocent comment. A throwaway line meant to show camaraderie. Leo stopped typing. He turned his head and looked at me. His expression was one I'd never seen him direct at me before. It was a mix of disbelief and pity. He snorted, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "You don't know what a covalent bond is?" The way he said it wasn't a genuine question. It was an accusation. It was as if I had just confessed to not knowing how to read. The air went out of my lungs. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I mean, I learned it once," I stammered, feeling defensive. "I haven't touched a chemistry book in over 12 years, Leo. It's not exactly information I've kept stored in my brain." He just shook his head slowly, a condescending little smile playing on his lips. "Right." He turned back to his computer, leaving me sitting in the armchair, my book forgotten in my lap. The room was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was heavy, charged. The comfortable quiet had been replaced by a tense, awkward void. I felt small. I felt stupid. And for the first time, I felt a chasm opening between us, right there in our living room. It was a tiny crack in our foundation, but I would soon learn that cracks like that have a way of spreading. In the weeks that followed, the paper cuts became more frequent. Leo's newfound knowledge became a cudgel, and he seemed to take a strange pleasure in wielding it against me. He started sending me Instagram reels and TikToks, all related to science and chemistry. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification from him. It was a link to a 3-minute video of a hyper-enthusiastic man in a lab coat explaining the chemical process behind some industrial machine. The explanation was dense, filled with heavy jargon and complex formulas that flashed across the screen. I watched it, understanding maybe every fifth word. I texted him back, trying to keep things light. "Wow, that's cool and a lot of words." Haha. My phone buzzed again almost instantly. It was a message from him. But when I looked at the screen, I saw he was typing and then he stopped. Then he started typing again. A minute later, a simple message appeared. "Come to the living room." I walked out of my home office, a sense of unease twisting in my stomach. He was sitting on the couch, phone in hand, looking at me with that same serious, analytical expression. "What's up?" I asked. He looked at me, his head tilted. "You didn't understand that video?" "Not really," I admitted with a nervous laugh. "It was a little over my head." He shook his head, not in a mean way, but in a way that was almost worse, like a patient teacher disappointed in a slow student. "It was all fairly simple concepts, Clara." He explained it very clearly. "The principles of catalysis, reaction kinetics, it's all basic stuff." The implication was clear: if it was simple, and I didn't understand it, then I must be simple-minded. "Well, I'm not a chemistry student, Leo," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm a librarian. It's not my field." "It's not about being a student," he countered, his tone calm and maddeningly rational. "It's about intellectual curiosity. It's about wanting to understand the world." The conversation ended there, but the feeling lingered. He was drawing lines in the sand, creating an intellectual hierarchy where he, the high school dropout, was suddenly on top, and I, the woman with a master's degree, was at the bottom. He never, ever mentioned the math he was studying. He knew better. I had been a math tutor for 4 years during my undergrad. That was my territory, and he avoided it completely. This was all about chemistry, his new kingdom, and he was making sure I knew I was not a welcome citizen. The most infuriating incident happened a week later. We were trying to stream a movie on his laptop, but the connection kept lagging. Suddenly, in the middle of our conversation, the video call we were on with his friend Rick dropped without a word. 20 minutes passed. I texted him, asking if everything was okay. No response. Finally, he called me back. Okay, I fixed it. We can try again, he announced, his voice filled with the pride of a successful surgeon. Great. What was the issue? I asked, genuinely curious. He chuckled. It was a low, patronizing sound that immediately set my teeth on edge. Clara, I would explain it to you, but you wouldn't understand. It's a lot of tech stuff. My jaw tightened. Try me. No, really, he insisted, his voice dripping with condescension. Go learn about network protocols and packet loss first, and then maybe I can explain it to you. Later that night, when he was talking to Rick again, I overheard the real reason the call had dropped. His old, overworked laptop had gotten the blue screen of death. That was it. The dreaded, universally understood symbol of computer failure. Who the hell needs to learn about tech stuff to have that explained to them? I stood in the hallway, listening, and a cold, hard anger settled in my chest. This wasn't about his ego anymore. This was about disrespect. He wasn't just trying to feel smarter, he was actively trying to make me feel dumber. He was taking his own insecurities about his academic struggles and projecting them all onto me. Every definition he mastered, every formula he memorized, became another brick in the wall he was building between us. And I was getting so tired of staring at it. The behavior persisted for months, a slow drip poison seeping into the foundations of our relationship. It became a new, unwelcome part of our dynamic. Leo, the aspiring engineer, and Clara, his intellectually inferior girlfriend. He seemed to find a new example of my ignorance every day, presenting each one not as a simple gap in my knowledge, but as a fundamental flaw in my character. One evening, I was cooking dinner while he studied at the kitchen table. I was trying a new recipe for Thai green curry, carefully measuring out the spices. Hey, can you pass me the coconut milk? I asked. He looked up from his textbook, a thoughtful expression on his face. You know, the emulsification process in coconut milk is fascinating. It's all about the suspension of fat globules in water, held together by natural proteins. It's a perfect example of a colloid. I just stared at him, spatula in hand. Okay. Can I just have the can, please? He sighed dramatically, as if my lack of enthusiasm was a personal affront. You're not curious at all, are you? About how the world works on a molecular level? Leo, I'm trying to make sure this curry doesn't burn, I said, my patience wearing thin. Right now, I'm more curious about whether I have enough fish sauce. He shook his head and slid the can across the table. That's the difference between us, I guess. I need to know why. The implication hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating as the curry steam. He was a deep thinker. I was superficial. I started to withdraw. I stopped asking him about his studies. When he would launch into a lecture about thermodynamics while we were brushing our teeth, I would just nod and hum noncommittally. I created a protective shell around myself, a quiet space where his condescension couldn't reach me. But it was lonely inside that shell. The easy intimacy we once shared was being replaced by a careful, exhausting dance of avoidance. My best friend, Maya, saw it happening. We met for coffee one Saturday, and I couldn't hide my exhaustion. You look tired, she said, her therapist eyes analyzing me over the rim of her mug. And not just, I worked a long week, tired. You look drained. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It's Leo, I confessed. And I told her everything. The covalent bond comment. The science videos. The "you wouldn't understand" attitude. As I spoke, I felt a knot of shame in my stomach, as if I were betraying him. But I was so tired of carrying it all alone. Maya listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "So," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "He's weaponizing his education against you." The word "weaponizing" hit me hard. It was the perfect description for what he was doing. "I guess so," I mumbled. "But I don't think he means to. He's just insecure. He's struggling, and this is how he copes." "Insecurity is an explanation, Clara. It's not an excuse," she said gently. "He's making you feel small to make himself feel big. That's not a healthy dynamic. That's a red flag the size of a billboard." "But I'm the one who encouraged him to do this," I argued, a wave of guilt washing over me. "I wanted this for him." "You wanted him to find a career. You didn't sign up to be his intellectual punching bag," she countered. "You have a master's degree, for God's sake. You are one of the smartest people I know. The fact that he's making you doubt that is a huge problem." Her words were a life raft in a sea of confusion. She was right. I knew she was right. But my heart ached with a loyalty that my brain couldn't override. I loved the man he was before the textbooks and the ego took over. I kept hoping that man would come back. The midpoint of his chemistry course arrived. The final exam was a major hurdle, worth a significant portion of his grade. The week leading up to it, our apartment was a pressure cooker. Leo was stressed, irritable, and more condescending than ever. He barely slept, fueled by energy drinks and a desperate need to succeed. I did my best to stay out of his way, tiptoeing around his fragile ego. I made sure he had food, that the apartment was quiet, that he had everything he needed. I was supportive, but from a distance. The day he got his results, I was at work. My phone buzzed. It was a screenshot from him. A close-up of his grade for the course, 84%. B. A wave of relief washed over me. He'd done it. He'd passed. I immediately typed out a reply, "Congratulations. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." His response came a few minutes later. "It's fine. I barely even tried. Could have gotten an A if I'd actually studied." My thumb hovered over the screen. A cold, familiar disappointment settled in my stomach. Even in his moment of success, he couldn't just be happy. He had to diminish the accomplishment, frame it as something that came easily to his superior intellect. He couldn't admit he'd worked his ass off, that he had struggled. That would be admitting vulnerability. When I got home that evening, he was on the phone, pacing back and forth in the living room. His voice was loud, booming with a self-congratulatory energy that filled the entire apartment. "Yeah, Rick, an 84. In chemistry," he was saying. "Dude, I honestly think I could have taught the class. The professor was an idiot. I basically skimmed the textbook the night before the final." I stood in the doorway, my work bag still on my shoulder, and listened. He wasn't just proud, he was bragging. He was bragging like a high school freshman, not a 33-year-old man trying to build a new life for himself. He was creating a myth, a fiction where he was the effortless genius, the natural talent who didn't even need to try. And in that moment, watching him preen and posture, something inside me shifted. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible click. The unwavering love and admiration I had for him flickered. It was replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite name at the time, but would later recognize as the ick. It was that cringe-worthy, full-body revulsion you feel when someone's behavior shatters the illusion you've built of them. The man I loved, the kind, intuitive, quietly brilliant man who could fix anything, was gone. In his place was this insecure boy, desperately puffing up his chest and crowing about AB on a high school equivalency test. He finally got off the phone and saw me standing there. "Hey. Did you see my grade? He asked, a huge, triumphant grin on his face. I did, I said, forcing a smile. That's great, Leo. Great? It was easy, he said, waving his hand dismissively. He walked over to the fridge and pulled out 2 beers. This calls for a celebration. To me, the future engineer. He handed me a bottle. I took it, my fingers cold against the glass. I watched him take a long, celebratory swig, his chest puffed out. The distance between us had never felt greater. He was celebrating a victory, but all I could feel was a profound sense of loss. We were standing in the same room, but we were living in completely different realities. In his, he was a conquering hero. In mine, I was just tired. So incredibly tired. The weeks after the exam were worse. His success, instead of mellowing him out, had only emboldened him. The 84% became his credential, the proof he needed to solidify his position as the intellectual authority in our relationship. It was his shield and his sword. He'd work it into every conversation, using it to slice away at my confidence, piece by piece. If we watched a sci-fi movie, he'd pause it to say, the writers clearly don't have a basic grasp of physics. Anyone who passed a high school chemistry course would know that's impossible. If I mentioned a news article about a new medical discovery, he'd nod sagely. It all comes down to biochemistry. It's complex stuff, but once you understand the fundamentals, like I do, it all makes sense. He was insufferable. And I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. I grew quiet, cautious. I started to second-guess myself, to hesitate before speaking, wondering if what I was about to say would be deemed unintelligent. He was creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. By constantly treating me like I was dumb, he was making me feel dumb, which in turn made me act more reserved and less confident. The vibrant, equal partnership we once had was now a toxic, one-sided lecture series. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was this the same man I had fallen in love with? The man who was once impressed by my knowledge of library cataloging systems. The man whose humility was one of his most endearing qualities. It was as if his success in one small area had erased all memory of his own past struggles, and in doing so, had erased any respect he had for my own accomplishments. My master's degree, my stable career, my own intellectual life all meant nothing in the face of his 84% in beginner's chemistry. The final straw wasn't a big, dramatic fight. It was a small comment, a passing remark that was the culmination of months of tiny cuts. It was the one comment that finally made me bleed. We were making dinner together, a rare moment of attempted normalcy. The air was already thick with unspoken tension, but we were both trying, going through the motions of the couple we used to be. I was chopping vegetables for a salad, and he was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. He let out a small chuckle. "Look at this," he said, turning the phone to show me a meme. It was one of those science jokes that only people currently studying the subject would find funny, something about moles and Avogadro's number. I glanced at it and gave a weak, polite smile. I don't get it. He shook his head, but this time, there was a real note of pity in his voice. It wasn't aggressive, it was worse. It was a gentle, paternalistic disappointment. "It's okay," he said, patting my shoulder in a way that felt more like a pat on a child's head. "It's just sometimes I think I just get this science stuff more than you. I'm just intuitively more interested in it. My brain is just wired that way, I guess." And that was it. The dam broke. All the frustration, all the hurt, all the biting my tongue for months, it coalesced into a single, white-hot point of anger inside my chest. I put the knife down on the cutting board. The sharp clack of the steel against the wood cut through the air. I turned to face him, my expression wiped clean of any emotion. The protective shell I had built wasn't just a defense anymore, it was armor. "You know, Leo," I said, my voice dangerously calm, 16-year-olds take this exact chemistry class every single year. Thousands of them. And they pass it easily. I paused, letting the words land. I watched his smug, self-satisfied smile falter, confusion replacing the condescension in his eyes. I'm not sure, I continued, each word precise and deliberate, that it warrants this much of an ego. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical thing, pressing in on us from all sides. The color drained from Leo's face. The look in his eyes was one of pure shock, as if I had slapped him. The carefully constructed persona of the effortless genius I had just described shattered into a million pieces at his feet. In its place was the raw, gaping wound of his insecurity, exposed for the first time. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Then he turned, walked out of the kitchen, went into our bedroom, and shut the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood alone in the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I should have felt a sense of victory, of vindication. I had finally said the thing I'd been holding back for so long. I had stood up for myself. But I didn't feel victorious. I just felt a deep, chilling cold. I had taken his biggest insecurity, the one he had tried so desperately to cover up with layers of arrogance and condescension, and I had thrown it back in his face. I hadn't just punctured his ego, I had eviscerated it. He didn't come out of the bedroom for the rest of the night. I ate my salad alone, the crisp lettuce tasting like paper in my mouth. I went to sleep on the couch. The days that followed were a new kind of hell. The condescension and the bragging were gone, but they were replaced by something far worse, a thick, suffocating wall of silence. Leo moved through the apartment like a ghost. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't speak to me unless absolutely necessary, and when he did, his voice was a flat monotone, devoid of all emotion. The vibrant, chaotic, sometimes infuriating man I loved had vanished. In his place was a stranger, a hollowed-out shell of a person. The light in his eyes was gone. His desk in the corner of the living room, once the hub of his new life, became a monument to a dead dream. The chemistry textbook lay closed. The laptop was shut. The colorful pens were back in their cup, unused. He had completely and utterly given up. The dream of being an engineer, the one thing that had given him purpose and direction, had died on our kitchen floor. And I was the one who had killed it. The guilt was a physical weight on my shoulders. It was a constant, dull ache in the center of my chest. Maya's words echoed in my head. Insecurity is an explanation, not an excuse, but the logic felt distant, academic. The reality was the hollowed-out man who shared my apartment, a man whose spark I felt personally responsible for extinguishing. I had wanted him to stop his condescending behavior, but I had never wanted this. I had never wanted to break him. I tried to bridge the gap. A few days after the fight, I cooked his favorite meal, lasagna from scratch. It was a peace offering, a clumsy attempt to say what I couldn't articulate: I'm sorry, let's go back to how we were. I set the table, lit a couple of candles, and waited. He eventually emerged from the bedroom, drawn out by the smell. He looked at the table, at the steaming dish, and his face was a blank canvas. I made lasagna, I said softly. I'm not hungry, he replied, his voice flat. He walked past the table, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and retreated back into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. I sat at the table alone, staring at the two place settings, the two full plates. The sight was so pathetic, so heartbreakingly emblematic of our situation, that I had to choke back a sob. I blew out the candles and threw the entire lasagna in the trash. The waste felt appropriate, everything about us felt like a waste now. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was an active presence. It followed me from room to room. It sat between us on the couch when we'd mindlessly watch TV, each of us staring at the screen but seeing nothing. It was the first thing I felt when I woke up and the last thing I was aware of before I fell into a restless sleep. It was a constant reminder of my failure, of his pain. His friends started to notice. Rick called one afternoon, his voice laced with concern. Hey Clara, what's up with Leo? I've texted him a few times and he's barely responding. Is he okay? He's just been quiet lately, I said, the lie feeling thin and brittle. Is it the school stuff? Is it getting to him? Something like that, I mumbled, feeling a fresh wave of guilt. Rick and his other friends had been so genuinely proud of him. They had seen his effort as a monumental step. Now, because of me, that step had led him off a cliff. I was trapped in a paradox. I hated what he had become, the arrogant lecturer, but I felt a deep, aching responsibility for his retreat back into aimlessness. I missed the old Leo, the one before the studying began, but I mourned the loss of the future we were supposed to be building. It was a confusing, exhausting emotional state, and it was draining the life out of me. The turning point, the moment I realized the situation was truly unsustainable, came that weekend. We had promised months ago to go to a birthday party for a mutual friend, Sarah. I assumed, given the circumstances, that we wouldn't go. But on Saturday afternoon, I saw Leo showering and putting on a clean shirt, a pair of jeans that weren't stained with grease or paint. Are you going to Sarah's party? I asked, surprised. We said we would, he said, his voice a monotone, still not looking at me. The drive there was excruciating. We sat in the car, the radio off, the silence between us a roaring beast. It was the first time we'd been confined in such a small space together since the fight, and the tension was so thick I felt like I was suffocating. I kept glancing over at him, at his stony profile, wanting to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. What was there to say? At the party, we put on our masks. The moment we walked through the door, we transformed into the couple everyone knew. Leo summoned a ghost of his former self, laughing at jokes, engaging in conversation. I smiled, I chatted, I asked people about their jobs. We were a portrait of normalcy. It was a lie, a carefully choreographed performance for an unsuspecting audience. We never stood next to each other for more than a few minutes. We were two separate satellites, orbiting the party on different trajectories. I'd catch his eye from across the room, and for a split second, the mask would drop, and I'd see the same weary sadness that I felt in my own heart. Then he'd look away, and the facade would be back in place. Sarah, the birthday girl, pulled me aside near the kitchen. Is everything okay with you and Leo? She asked, her brow furrowed with concern. You guys seem off tonight. Oh, no, we're fine, I lied, forcing a bright smile that felt like it was cracking my face. Just tired. Long week. The lie tasted like poison. We were so far from fine. We were a dying star, still emitting light from a past that no longer existed, fooling everyone around us while collapsing in on ourselves. The effort was immense. By the time we left, I felt like I had run a marathon. The moment the car door closed, our masks fell away, and the crushing silence descended once more. But this time, something was different. The performance at the party, the sheer energy it took to pretend, had clarified something for me. This wasn't living. This was acting. And I couldn't do it anymore. Back at the apartment, I didn't let him retreat to the couch. I stood in the middle of the living room, my arms crossed, blocking his path. We can't keep doing this, I said, my voice quiet but firm. He stopped, his shoulders slumping. He looked exhausted. Doing what? This. This silence. This pretending. Living like roommates who hate each other. It's killing me, Leo. My voice trembled with a week's worth of pent-up misery. He finally looked at me, really looked at me. His eyes were tired, so incredibly tired. What do you want me to say, Clara? He asked, his voice raspy with disuse. Do you want me to tell you it's okay? That what you said didn't matter? Because it did. You finally said what you really thought of me. That I'm a joke. A kid playing at being a man. That's not what I think, I cried, tears finally breaking free and streaming down my face. Isn't it? He challenged, and for the first time in days, a spark of emotion flared in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it was a deep, profound hurt. You're the one with the degrees, the career, the perfect life. I'm the screw-up who can't even pass a high school class without getting an ego about it. You just confirmed everything I've always been afraid of. The chasm between us, the one I'd first felt on that night he asked about covalent bonds, had now become a vast, impassable canyon. He wasn't just hurt by my words, he had absorbed them into his sense of self. He believed them. And I realized, with a horrifying clarity, that my apology would never be enough. I couldn't unsay those words, and he couldn't unhear them. The damage was done. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it had been pulverized. We weren't just a couple in a fight. We were two people who had fundamentally misunderstood each other, and in doing so, had inflicted wounds that might never heal. His words hung in the air, a devastatingly honest confession. You just confirmed everything I've always been afraid of. It was the key. The key to understanding the last few months of arrogance, the condescension, the desperate need to feel superior. It wasn't about him thinking he was better than me. It was about him being terrified that he wasn't good enough. The brash, confident man I had fallen in love with, the one who could fix anything, had one thing he couldn't mend, his own deep-seated feeling of inadequacy when he stood next to me. My anger, the righteous indignation I had been clinging to, evaporated. It was replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. I saw him, truly saw him for the first time in months. Not as the antagonist in my story, but as the struggling protagonist of his own. Leo, that's not true, I whispered, my tears now flowing not from my own pain, but from his. I fell in love with you because you were brilliant. Because you saw the world in a way no one else did. I fell in love with your mind long before you ever picked up a chemistry book. But it wasn't enough, was it? He shot back, the hurt in his voice sharp as broken glass. You wanted me to be more. To be like you. To have a degree, a career. This whole engineering thing, I was doing it for you. To close that gap between us. I never wanted you to be like me. I argued, my voice rising with a desperate need to make him understand. I wanted you to be happy. To find something you were passionate about that could also give you a stable future. I wanted it for us. But don't you see, Clara, he said, taking a step back, the distance between us feeling both physical and metaphorical. The moment I stepped into your world, the world of academics and grades, I started to lose. Because that's a game I can't win. You've been playing it your whole life and you've mastered it. I felt like a child learning to walk while you were running marathons. And instead of asking for help, instead of telling you I was scared I was going to fail, I acted like a goddamn king because I got a B. He let out a humorless, self-deprecating laugh. It's pathetic. I know it is. He finally sat down on the edge of the armchair, the one I had sat in that first night, and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. The sight broke me. All the walls, all the defenses, they were gone. We were just two people in a room, stripped bare, surrounded by the wreckage of our own making. I crossed the room and knelt in front of him. I gently placed my hands on his knees. He didn't pull away. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked, my voice soft. Why didn't you tell me you were struggling? That you felt insecure? He lifted his head, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and raw. Because I was ashamed, he admitted, his voice cracking. I wanted to be your partner, your equal. Not your project. I didn't want you to look at me with pity. The irony was crushing. In his effort to avoid my pity, he had earned my resentment. And in my effort to preserve my self-respect, I had delivered the very blow he had been dreading. We had been working at cross purposes, our good intentions curdling into poison. We stayed like that for a long time, the silence no longer a weapon, but a space for quiet contemplation. The fight was over. There were no more accusations to be thrown, no more defenses to be mounted. All that was left was the sad, quiet truth. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I loved you because you were solid. You were my anchor. But I think I was your storm. I just brought chaos and uncertainty. No, I said, shaking my head, my own tears starting anew. You were my adventure. You made my life bigger. You pulled me out of my neat, tidy boxes. And then I tried to cram myself into one of those boxes to be with you, he finished. And I didn't fit. We had arrived at the heart of the matter. The very differences that had drawn us together, me stability and his spontaneity, my book smarts and his life smarts, had become the very things that were tearing us apart. His attempt to bridge that gap had only served to highlight how wide it truly was. He couldn't be me, and I couldn't be him. And forcing either of us to be something we weren't was a recipe for mutual destruction. The energy in the room shifted. It was no longer the aftermath of a fight. It was the quiet, somber atmosphere of a vigil. We were mourning something. The future we had imagined. The couple we used to be. The love that was still there, flickering in the ruins, but no longer strong enough to rebuild. So what do we do? I asked the question that had been hanging between us for weeks, though I already knew the answer. It was an answer my heart refused to accept, but my mind knew was inevitable. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from my cheek. His touch was familiar and warm, and it sent a fresh wave of grief through me. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless sorrow, a reflection of my own. I think, he said, his voice barely a whisper, that maybe the kindest thing we can do for each other is let each other go. His words, as gentle as they were, felt like a physical blow. It was the end. Not an angry, slamming door end, but a quiet, heartbreaking conclusion. A mutual surrender. It was the final, logical step in a long, painful equation. And as much as I wanted to scream, to fight, to beg him to stay and try again, I knew he was right. Staying together would just mean finding new and more creative ways to hurt each other. Our love had become a beautiful cage, and we both needed to be set free. The decision, once spoken aloud, settled over the room with the weight of a final judgment. Let each other go. It wasn't an ultimatum or a threat. It was a conclusion, arrived at after months of a painful, undeclared war. It was a truth that had been hiding in plain sight, in the tense silences, in the forced smiles, in the growing distance between our bodies on the couch. We had both been fighting so hard, him to prove his worth, me to preserve my own, that we had destroyed the very thing we were trying to build. There were no more arguments, no more tears of anger. Just a shared, quiet sorrow that was almost more painful. It felt less like a breakup and more like a surrender. We were laying down our arms because we had both lost. The next day, a Saturday, was spent dismantling the life we had built together. The process was methodical and heartbreakingly polite. We moved around each other with a gentle, careful choreography, like two dancers who had forgotten the steps to their own routine, their bodies still remembering a grace that their hearts could no longer feel. Do you want this mug? I'd ask, holding up a chipped ceramic cup from a local pottery fair we had visited one sunny afternoon. It had a poorly painted bee on it. He always said it looked more like a flying raisin. No, you keep it, he'd say softly, not looking at the mug but at my hands. You always liked that one more. Every object was a memory, a small piece of our shared history. The worn-out armchair where he used to sit for hours, deep in a documentary, while I read beside him. The framed concert poster from our first date, a local indie band we both pretended to like more than we actually did. The collection of mismatched magnets on the fridge, souvenirs from road trips up the coast and weekend getaways to the mountains. We divided them up with a quiet, somber efficiency, each item a fresh little stab to the heart. His friend Rick came over in the afternoon to help with the larger furniture, the heavy armchair, the desk, the bed frame. He was subdued, his usual boisterous energy gone. He shot me a look of pity and confusion, as if trying to understand how it had all fallen apart so quickly. He had been there for the celebratory phone call about the 84%. He'd seen the hope. Now he was here for the aftermath. He didn't know the half of it. No one did. Our love story hadn't been a sudden, explosive crash. It had been a slow, quiet erosion, a foundation worn away by a constant, dripping poison until the whole structure simply collapsed under its own weight. The hardest part, for me, was watching him take apart the desk. His study corner. As he unscrewed the legs, I saw the chemistry textbook lying on the floor. I picked it up, its weight familiar in my hands. I opened it to a random page and saw his notes in the margins, hasty, almost frantic scribbles, questions he'd written to himself, and aggressively underlined words. It was tangible proof of his effort, of his struggle. He hadn't been the effortless genius he pretended to be. He had been trying. So damn hard. A wave of regret so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. What if I had been more patient? What if I had seen past the arrogant facade to the terrified man underneath? What if I had created a safe space for him to fail, instead of an environment where he felt he had to constantly prove himself against my own quiet achievements? But then, another thought followed, a quiet but firm voice of self-preservation that sounded a lot like Maya. What if he had trusted you enough to be vulnerable? What if he had treated you like a partner, not a competitor? I had a right to be respected. I had a right not to be made to feel small in my own home. My patience had run out because he had drained it, drop by painful drop. And that was the tragedy of it all. We were both right. And we were both wrong. Our flaws had interlocked in the most destructive way possible, like two mismatched gears grinding each other down to dust. By late afternoon, the apartment felt cavernous. The spaces where his things used to be were like missing teeth in a sad smile. The absence of his clutter, his half-finished projects, his general chaotic presence, made the apartment feel sterile and wrong. He did a final sweep of the rooms, his footsteps echoing on the bare floor. He ended up in the living room, standing in front of the large TV he had mounted so perfectly on the wall. A testament to his practical genius. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool screen. "I remember the day we put this up," he said, his voice distant. "You were so worried it was going to be crooked. And you got it perfect on the first try," I finished, my voice thick. "Like always." He turned to me, and for the first time all day, he met my eyes directly. In their depths, I saw the man I had first fallen in love with, the kind, clever, capable man whose hands could fix anything. Except, it turned out, us. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, and I knew he didn't just mean for the condescending comments or the bragging. He meant for everything. For not being the man I needed him to be. For letting his insecurities turn him into someone cruel. "I'm sorry too, Leo," I whispered back. For not being the woman he needed, either. For my lack of grace, for the final, brutal words that I could never take back. He picked up the last of his boxes. It was the one with his textbooks. The one I had packed in a different timeline, the one from the beginning of this story. He paused at the door, his back to me. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said. It sounded like a genuine wish, free of bitterness. "You too," I managed to say. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and I was alone in the echoing silence of our, now my, apartment. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, in the middle of the living room, listening to the sounds of his departure, the heavy tread of his boots on the stairs, the slam of a car door, the engine turning over and then fading into the distance. Each sound was a final, definitive period at the end of a chapter. Then, there was nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a screaming void. I had gotten what I thought I wanted. The condescension was gone, the constant pressure was gone. I was free. But it was a hollow, painful freedom. It was the freedom of an astronaut whose tether has been cut, floating alone in the vast, cold emptiness of space. The next few weeks were a blur of numb routines. I went to work, where the order and logic of my archiving job was a comfort. I came home. I ate takeout food straight from the container because cooking for one felt too sad. I talked to Maya on the phone every night, her voice a comforting, grounding presence in the crushing quiet. "How are you doing?" she'd ask, skipping the usual pleasantries. "Really? I don't know," I'd say honestly, curled up on the couch that suddenly felt enormous. "I feel relieved and devastated at the same time." "Is that possible?" "It's called grief," she'd reply gently, her therapist voice kicking in. "You're grieving the man you loved, and you're grieving the future you thought you'd have. It's okay to feel both. They aren't mutually exclusive." She was right. I was grieving. I missed his laugh, a loud, booming thing that used to fill the entire apartment. I missed the way he'd leave his socks on the floor and the way he'd get so engrossed in a documentary he'd forget the world around him. I even missed his endless, half-baked ideas. The apartment was tidy now, organized, quiet. It was exactly the way a person like me should want it. But it felt wrong. It lacked life. It lacked him. At the same time, a slow, quiet sense of relief was beginning to take root. I noticed it in small ways. I could watch a sci-fi movie without having it paused for a lecture on physics. I could read a news article without bracing for his analysis. I could say, "I don't know," without feeling a sting of shame. The low-grade anxiety I had been living with for months had dissipated. I could breathe again. I was starting to feel like myself again, the person I was before I became one half of a toxic equation. One rainy Sunday, about a month after he left, I was doing a deep clean, a final exorcism of the ghosts of our relationship. I was wiping down the inside of the entryway closet when my hand brushed against something. I pulled it out. It was the chemistry textbook. He must have left it behind by accident, or perhaps on purpose. I picked it up, intending to put it in a donation pile. I carried it into the living room and sat down on the couch. My fingers opened it automatically to the page bookmarked with that faded yellow sticky note. My eyes fell on the words I had seen in my mind's eye so many times. Covalent bond, a chemical bond that involves the sharing of electron pairs between atoms. Sharing. A single, hot tear fell from my eye and landed on the page, blurring the ink. It wasn't a bond based on one atom taking from another. It wasn't about one atom proving it was better than the other. It was about sharing. About existing together, in balance, to create something stronger than the individual parts. We had never learned how to do that. He had tried to absorb my stability and academic validation to fill his own empty spaces. And I had pulled back, hoarding my own self-worth, unwilling to share it for fear of having none left for myself. His insecurity had made him cruel, and my pride had made me merciless. The screen splits. The two images appear side by side, a diptych of our separate new lives. On the left side, I am in my apartment. It's clean, orderly, filled with the soft, warm light of a table lamp. I am curled up on the couch, the chemistry book resting in my lap. My finger traces the water-stained definition of the covalent bond. I look out the window at the rain-streaked Portland skyline. My life is back to the predictable, stable checklist it once was. There is peace, but there is also a profound loneliness. I am free from the constant emotional turmoil, but I am also free from his laughter, his spontaneity, his brilliant, chaotic energy. I have protected my self-respect, but my heart is broken. I close the book and place it on the coffee table. I take a deep, shaky breath, a sigh of both relief and loss. On the right side of the screen, Leo is in a small, new apartment across town. It's a garage space, messy, filled with unpacked boxes and the gleaming skeletons of vintage motorcycle engines. He's sitting on a low stool, his hands black with grease, a wrench in his hand. He is completely absorbed, his mind focused, his ADHD channeled into a task he understands, a complex mechanical system he can master. He looks content. He is free from the pressure to be someone he's not, free from the academic world that made him feel so small. But as he pauses his work to wipe a smudge of grease from his brow, his eyes drift to an empty space on his tool bench, and a flicker of deep sadness crosses his face. He has protected his fragile ego, but he is alone. He puts the wrench down and takes a deep, shaky breath, a sigh of both relief and loss. The two images hold a perfect, tragic symmetry. We were not a failed experiment. We were just two different elements, two people who, under immense pressure, discovered that our bond was not covalent. It was combustible. And breaking apart was the only way to keep from destroying each other completely. It wasn't a happy ending. But for us, it was the only one possible. It was a necessary amputation to save two lives.